Welcome to First in the Family, where we explore the world of breaking generational chains and patterns due to access, education, will, or sheer bravery. We celebrate the ways that these accomplishments bring about joy. We honor the ways that these changes can lead to discomfort or pain. And we grieve the sacrifices that all of it requires. My name is Cecy, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. Let's see who's first. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Alan Michael Leeds, a good friend of mine and a music business veteran. He is a semi-retired music executive, tour manager, production manager, published author, and archivist. He's had a remarkable career in the music industry. I'm so excited that he's come today to First in the Family to talk about this illustrious career, but more importantly, his role as a white man in a Black music world. Please help me welcome Alan Leeds. Alan Leeds, welcome to First in the Family, my friend. Let's pretend we haven't been talking for an hour and a half already.
Have we? Who?
No. We'll pretend we haven't.
We're starting from scratch here.
We're starting from scratch. Well, first of all, thanks for coming. It's great to see you. It's great to catch up.
Good to see you.
Alan Leeds, you are music royalty, is what I tell people. Music biz veteran, semi-retired, because you still be doing a lot of stuff. Music executive, tour manager, production manager, author, archivist. Is that the way you say it? Archivist?
Sure. You could say archivist since you're
archivist. Oh, I am. I am a Southern belle. I didn't wear my pearls today, though.
Right.
Alan, you've had probably the most remarkable career of anyone I know in probably any industry, but especially the entertainment industry. You were James Brown's road manager, tour manager for Prince. You've worked with Kool and the Gang, Bootsy's Rubber Band, Harold Melvin, the Blue Notes with Teddy Pendergrass. You've worked with Kiss, Cameo, Sheila E, Barry White, Maxwell, Raphael Saadiq, D'Angelo, just like one or two heavy hitters. You've co-edited the critically acclaimed James Brown Reader with Nelson George. Shout out to Nelson. That's a good dude. And an author of There Was a Time, James Brown, the Chitlin Circuit and Me, which I have a copy upstairs. I should have brought it down. So you've had quite the life, Alan.
Yeah. Let's get off the past tense.
He's like, I'm still here, damn it.
When you get to my age, you're really sensitive about stuff like that. Because it's like you gotta wake up in the morning with all the aches and pains and say, yeah, there's something left to do. Let me get up after all.
Well, you're still at it. We were just talking about you'll be is it co-producing a new piece about James Brown?
Yeah, I'm one of the many producers on a project for A&E television that's going to be a 4-episode series on the life and times of James Brown and how he played a role in the civil rights movement, both musically and physically, and what he stood for as an example in the music industry is one of the first artists to completely own his career and not be at the beck and call of managers and agents and so on who may or may not have other agendas that weren't in his best interest. He had control, and not from the beginning, obviously, but throughout the majority of his career, including his peak years, he had creative control. He was basically self-managed, and we're talking late 60s and early 70s, and he was an example and actually the envy of most of his peers in the business.
Wow.
People like Marvin Gaye and and Curtis Mayfield, who were struggling to reach that same position, and to some degree eventually did. But Brown was in that situation long before anybody else. And it was an example of you can do this. That if you're willing to do more than sing and dance and actually learn this industry that you're part of and how it works, you can do this. And so it was fun to be part of that organization, because we always felt, whether you liked his records or not, what we were doing had some significance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful, because I feel like even today, so many artists are still struggling to just, have rights to their own music, have rights to their own ideas on what they want to create, who they want to be out in the space. So to think of, somebody like James Brown, being like a pioneer in really taking command of his own craft, taking command of his own career in a time when not only was that unheard of in the industry, but unheard of for Black musicians, right?
Exactly.
In this country. So how amazing that you had a front seat in such a historic event like that.
It really, really was a blessing in so many ways, because as a very young guy, I was 20 years old when I left college to go to work for him. And, very green behind the ears in terms of how the music business rolled, which is particularly at that time. Now it's been corporatized.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of like, you want to be in the music business, go to law school. That's the
funny
way to get it.
Yeah.
And prosper. Okay.
Yeah.
But obviously, I'm not talking about performers or artists. I'm talking about people, behind
managers,
the scenes, quote. But at that particular time, it was a real mom and pop business, and there were no all access laminated passes. Your backstage pass was your ability to talk your way there and get past the security guy and convince him that it was cool to let you in.
Yeah.
And I worked for a radio station that promoted most of the shows in the city I was living at the time. And that was my entree. So because I worked for the radio station, promoted the shows, and sometimes make an appearance on stage, but even if not, it was a backstage pass. And I made it my business to get to know artists and musicians and managers. Anybody who was backstage, gophers, I didn't care. I wanted to know everybody that rode on the tour bus and find out, like, okay, how do I make myself necessary enough to get a seat on that bus? And that, it was just that simple.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy to accomplish the goal, but it was the access, and the methodology was simple, because it was like, hang out and learn something you can do.
Yeah.
That's all. Just observe and figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
And James Brown noticed, and for whatever reason, we bonded. And a couple of years later, when he needed somebody, he called. God bless him. And that was the beginning of this crazy journey of mine.
Incredible. I feel like that kind of move. It had to be risky, I imagine, when it comes to, like, you said you were 20 years old. So, like, your parents, your family. I feel like even now, right, there's this stigma against pursuing any kind of career in the arts, right? It's seen as too dangerous or too, unsure and unstable. And in your survey, you said you were the first in your family to pursue something like a career path that might be deemed strange or unorthodox or non-traditional. What was like the Leeds family behind the scene as you're doing this, working in the radio station and tracking down people and eventually working for James Brown? Was it supported? Was it questioned? Was it challenged?
Kind of all of the above. Excuse me. They were let's put it this way. They were always supportive to my face.
Okay.
Which was really all I could ask for. I'm sure they were scared shitless at times. Probably we went through that phase before I went to work for James Brown. I mean, the idea of quitting college to get on a tour bus, that no parent is going to think that's wise, you know. So I'm sure they weren't thrilled about that. But I think they sensed that I was obsessed. There was nothing really mature about me yet that I was sitting there carefully thinking out my career goals and career goals. I wasn't thinking, you know, I was a journalism major because I liked journalism, but I didn't really think I was going to end up being a journalist. Okay. I just knew I had to be around this music somehow, and was waiting for the call. They're trying to figure out a way to get there. And they knew that about me. And I think they realized that it was a passion that they couldn't hold back. So as worrisome as they might have been, they showed me support. Yeah. And I think that was a huge blessing, really, because I didn't have to go on the road worried about that.
That's great. That's great.
Now, before I was 20, before I went to work, when I was, let me rewind this for a minute. When I was 17, I started working as a disc jockey on a radio station in Richmond, Virginia. It was a Black radio station. I was like the token white DJ who tried my best not to sound white. And, I don't mean that there was some Amos and Andy shit going on, because nobody would have tolerated that. But I wasn't trying. I wasn't trying to be like, this is fun. No, it was like we were trying to be cool. Right. And whatever it was, I was doing work because the ratings were good, and I kept the gig until the station got sold, and I decided to move out of Richmond, Virginia. But the point being is we were promoting all these shows on weekends and dance halls, and some of them were kind of rough cut and shoot dance halls in the hood, where the show started at 11 o'clock at night and ended at 3 in the morning. And I think if my parents really had any idea where I was hanging and the people I was hanging out with, it might have got a little testy. Yeah. Yeah. But you know, not necessarily because it was Black, right? But because this was Richmond, Virginia in the 60s, and
drugs and
there was that, but even that wasn't that bad. You know, even we call them cut and shoot clubs because there'd be fights. Any place where they serve liquor and guys go to find girls, there's going to be fights. I don't care if it's a country western bar, a rock and roll bar, a soul music bar. I don't care what the ethnic composition of the club and the music is. You know, you mix alcohol and single guys looking for girls, you're going to have fights.
There's going to be a problem.
It's just going to happen. Right? Yeah. But nobody was packing back then.
So it was fights, like real fights. Old school fights.
The worst would be somebody pull up a switchblade. Then it would be kind of like dodgy, because that's not good. Right. But nobody was packing. There were no metal detectors because nobody had any guns. Yeah. So it's like I never really felt unsafe. And my personal friends, my hanging buddies, were a couple of brothers who also worked at the radio station. They're the guys who brought me in the first place. And they were students at Virginia Union University. They were older than me, and they kind of took me under their wings and were mentors and, looked out for me. So it was like, it's a perfectly normal hang for me, particularly somebody who loved that music.
Yeah.
So if the Drifters were in town at a club one night and the Temptations the next night, or Otis Redding, all of these people came through town all the time. Yeah, I'm down to hang. And I would just tell my parents, look, I'm gonna sleep over at my friend's house.
Oh, okay. So they had no idea.
Yeah, no, they don't know I'm in a club at 3 a.m. downtown in the hood.
Got it.
That wouldn't have flown.
Got you.
I mean, it wouldn't have flown if it was a white club.
Right.
It just,
it's just
wouldn't have flown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy that you're just like, yeah, if the Drifters and the Temptation, like all these icons from history, you're like, yeah, when they were in town, I just kind of rolled down a by.
That's what the Chitlin Circuit was. It was a mom and pop business. These people are legends today, but the money, those clubs, it was $3 to get in.
Oof.
Maybe $2. And that would get $1,000. The Drifters would come through and maybe make $1,000. So this was not a huge big money industry.
Right.
And even though we look at them, some of them went on as the industry changed and the money got bigger. Then all of a sudden, Marvin Gaye, James Brown, some of the others, Temptations and so on, Stevie, list goes on, made serious cash. Yeah. But on the club circuit back then in the mid-'60s,
right. Do you think that was, I'm sure there's pros and cons, but generally speaking, do you think that was better, worse? What are the pros and cons of that music world versus the one of today?
The only people it was better for were the fans, because you could see people at an affordable ticket price. And because those acts had to tour all the time, and there's only so many places in the country to play, they would come through a town that was on the Chitlin Circuit, as Richmond was, 2 and 3 times a year. Maybe they'd come in February playing a dance hall, and then in June playing as part of a concert at a theater, then maybe in the fall playing a frat party for one of the schools. So you had this, I would see these people all the time, but it wasn't just me. I mean, there were people all up and down the East Coast who had the same experiences.
Right.
I mean, Atlanta, you had the Royal Peacock, you had theater shows. And, people like James Brown would come and play the Royal Peacock for 3 days, 2 shows a day, and cost $2 to get in.
That's crazy.
So that's what this Black music world was in the 60s. And I had this entree because of the radio station. And, you get to know the artist, it becomes a hang, because it's just where your passion is.
Right. Now, paint the scene from a demographic level. Are you like the one white dude that's standing in the sea of Black folks? Is it like a mixed group? Does it depend on the city? Do you stand out like a sore thumb? What was that side of it like?
It's mostly the one white dude.
Okay.
In most cases. I mean, James Brown, let's talk about it in phases. When I was in Richmond going to these clubs and stuff, I was very much the one white dude.
Okay.
If there was another, and I think the only reason I don't want to say accepted, I'm sure there were people there who were leery of my presence. Like, what's he doing here? Is he trying to pick up a Black girl, or what's his motive?
Yeah.
And truth be known, it might have been trying to pick up a Black girl.
You were trying to.
You didn't want to, you didn't want to play, you didn't want to broadcast that. But I think because I was so young, they didn't think I was a cop.
Okay.
Because otherwise they would have, because if there was ever another white dude in there, it was usually a cop.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay. Just fishing, just to see if it's overcrowded or if there's anything going on that shouldn't be going on,
Looking for a reason to get folks in trouble.
Exactly. And So during that era, I became very accustomed to being the one white dude.
What was that like in the beginning? Was it intimidating? Did you feel like you had to put on any kind of act or make people feel safe? Like, what was that like?
I guess, to be honest, all of the above at the very beginning. Now, mind you, I was usually with my friends, which were two Black guys from Virginia Union. So if anything, people were looking at them like, what's he doing with you? You know, why you got him tagging along?
Right. Is he cool?
And thankfully for me, they didn't give a shit about that. And I hasten to add, it wasn't because they were some Uncle Toms. They were pretty militant cats. So go figure. And I mean, we used to go to, there was a restaurant right near Virginia Union campus where all the kids would go for, it was a regular burger joint. It was like, Happy Days or some shit. And we used to go there for lunch or snacks and go for late supper after a show or something. And, they would always see their friends from campus. And I never really felt out of place. And I got to know their girlfriends who were also students at Union, and nature calls. It gets to the point where they got other girlfriends and they're like, well, who's this dude? And, it seemed so natural. I mean, it was something that for Richmond, Virginia at that particular time was 110% unnatural, but it felt natural. And when you're in the midst of just being and you don't feel a threat and everything around you feels comfortable and natural, you don't feel like anything's different or anything strange about it. And so those feelings went away pretty early.
That's interesting.
Now, it was inevitable that every once in a while there'd be some brother who really just didn't understand or just maybe had a couple drinks too many and just wanted to mess with us. And we knew how to diffuse that shit pretty quick.
And what did that look like? Good. Would they try to pick a fight with you or make comments? What was that about?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Did you get into any fights with folks?
One guy, say it again.
Sorry, did you ever get into any fights?
No other way, no.
Okay.
Push and shove once.
Okay.
Some guy followed me to a parking lot late at night after I was leaving a club. And started talking mess about, well, there was a girl with me. And he didn't appreciate that. And he started calling her names and me names and getting closer and closer. And it kind of turned into a push and shove until a couple other people who knew me came along and just kind of broke it up. So I can't say it was a serious fight. It probably could have been.
Yeah.
But see, there was part of me that he understood his anger.
You understood his anger.
So it's like no, if this woman is, and the funny thing was, it wasn't her girlfriend. It was one of the dancers from the show, and I was just giving her a ride home. And it was nothing between us.
Okay.
But that almost doesn't matter because it could have been, know.
Right.
But it was just, I understand that I could go places and do things that he couldn't do.
Yeah.
He couldn't go in a white club and take the white dancer home.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I had to wrestle with that and say, okay, does that mean I'm not supposed to be here? Because this is white privilege talking. And it's long before that phrase was in our psyche.
Right. But you were present to it.
Well, I wasn't present to the philosophy of it, but I was present to the reality of it.
Right.
There was enough of me that understood that there were things I could do he couldn't do. And that gave him a right to be angry, whether it was angry at me or angry at life in general or society or however you want to brand it. I got that.
Right.
So it was kind of like, I don't want to fight. I don't want to hit you. I also got to defend what you're doing. So it's like, where do you draw the line? And those were the situations that I did my very best to avoid because of these mixed emotions. And I was full of myself enough with the passion I had for this music. I mean, listen, if it hadn't been for the music, I'd have probably been in some white club trying to pull a white girl. Okay. This is about the music is what took me there. And a passion to be around it, to hear it, to meet people, to figure out a place for me in this milieu of this Chitlin Circuit. How can I fit in? And there were some other white people that worked within the circuit, that worked with certain artists, either as road managers or agents or whatever. So it wasn't completely unrealistic for me to imagine that I could figure out a way to get into this shit. And that's what had me in these places. So I had to constantly wrestle with, you know, I was too full of myself to feel guilty. I mean,
that's a good thing.
Quite honestly, I shouldn't have been on a black radio station. Now, I was good. I got the ratings, so I earned my keep. But any young black man who had aspirations for broadcasting had no opportunities in Richmond radio at all the other stations that were white. Right. So I'm taking up a place that's supposed to go to a brother. And I'm going to be honest and admit, I didn't think like that at first.
Right.
I think like to shit out Big Willie on afternoon drives. I'm on a black radio station. You know, I'm bad. But that was youth.
Right.
And by the second year it was on, it began to, you know, and people remember one time Sam and Dave, when they had Hold On and Coming and Soulmate and all those hits, were coming to town to do a show for us. And they were coming to the radio station to do an interview that afternoon to hype the evening show in a club somewhere. And I guess they had the radio station on as they were driving into town. So they got to the radio station and they were brought back into the booth for me to do the interview. And the two of them were speechless. And they're just like, you know, like rubbing their eyes. And they're like, "You're white." And then they just bust laughing. Now, to me, it's the biggest compliment in the world. It means I'm legit. It means I'm accepted, right? But that's the immaturity of a young kid with white privilege. And after another, you know, I don't know exactly when that happened, but I was on the radio for about 2 years. And then a whole lot of shit came down because it was the Vietnam War era. And I had finished high school, but I was not in college, which meant I didn't have a draft deferment. And eventually the armed services caught up and reclassified me 1A, which meant I was going to get called to go to Army. And I wasn't hardly doing that. So at that point, between having mixed feelings about continuing this role on radio, and it was like, okay, I need to get my butt in school because that's going to get me a deferment from armed services because I ain't hardly trying to get in the Army. And
I hear that.
At that particular time.
Wow.
So I went to college, and it was good for a couple of years till James Brown called.
Wow. Now, was it a performance? Was it, I know you mentioned twice, sort of not wanting to be that like typical white dude or sound like that typical white dude. And then you sort of get this seal of approval from two Black men who just heard your voice. Were you performing to get acceptance, or were you doing something different?
I was doing what the gig called for, is a true answer. Every disc jockey on radio in that era was performing.
Fair.
Because it was the era of rhyming, fast talking, Frankie Hollywood Crocker type DJs. Okay. That's so right. Everybody on the air had an obligation to their audience to talk some shit. And I was pretty good at it. So was I performing? Yes. And was it to be accepted? Yes. But the brothers who were on the same station were also performing to be accepted by the audience.
Right.
It's just that I know your question and why you're asking it. The racial aspect puts it kind of puts an asterisk on performing.
Right. Were you trying to sound Black?
Yes. And let me put it this way. No. I take that back. I was trying to sound hip.
Okay.
Because I felt hip would work.
Okay.
And it kind of like made people like, I would like to say that I was trying not to sound too white.
Right. Right.
At the risk of not trying to sound Black.
Got it. That seems like a thin line to toe for a 20-something-year-old. Yeah.
It's a real thin line.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I was full of myself was because I pulled it off, because I knew it was a thin line. And at one point, there was another Black radio station in town that tried to be a competitor to us, didn't work out too well for them. And they had a white disc jockey. They had one. And he was terrible. And he wasn't terrible because he was white. He was terrible if he'd been Black. He just wasn't good. But it was like, no, dude, you can't do what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I really thought I had that something unique. And, like I said, it was accepted by the station and everybody else who worked there with me.
Yeah.
The other disc jockeys, we were all friendly and hung out together. I mean, it wasn't just tolerance. I mean, we hung.
Right.
We were a posse. We used to do record ops on the weekends together and go out and chase girls together, and, whatever guys do. So I really didn't. I just wanted to be accepted, be hip enough to be accepted. And once I passed that threshold, I didn't really think about it anymore. It just became what you did. You just did. Like any gig that you do, once you've learned how to do it, then it's, I don't want to say automatic pilot, but kind of, you just go to work and you do it.
Right.
And you're not really, there's no self-analysis about it. It's just, you do what you do.
Right. You play the role. Now, what were other white folks? I know you said that you were usually the white the only white dude. But when you did encounter, whether it was the whack other white DJ or other white executives, or maybe just visiting your white family and seeing neighbors or people walking down the street, what was their reaction to you being in these Black worlds?
Most didn't know it.
Mm.
I had one very close friend who's also Jewish, which I think is a factor, because we Jews just we weren't part of the fabric of the old Confederacy, Virginia style.
Right.
Mind you, I wasn't born in Virginia. I was born up north. So I was already the Yankee Jew in my school. And then my dad's schools were still segregated then. So it was an all-white school, in the burbs, no less. And so I was already kind of like not in with the in crowd just because I was Jewish.
Okay. That's interesting.
And I'm not going to try to say that being ostracized because of being Jewish is the same thing as being ostracized by being a person of color, because obviously it's not. There's some commonalities when you feel ostracized, because what it does to a human and your self-worth and all that shit is similar, but in obviously vastly different degrees, because I'm still white. When I walk in the supermarket, I'm not Jewish, I'm a white guy.
Right.
So, not trying to say that's the same thing.
No,
but I never really belonged.
Right.
So I didn't really worry about it. Plus most whites in Virginia weren't listening to the Black radio station. So they didn't know. I mean, interestingly, I had a Spanish teacher at school who I assume was from Virginia. I don't know if she was born or raised there, but she had a very thick Southern accent. And I came into school one day and she said, "Is that you on the radio?"
Uh-oh.
It was like, yeah. She said, "You're swinging. That's great." I was impressed. I called my husband and said, "He's one of my students. He's one of my students." But she's doing this in this thick Southern drawl, and I mean, classes. Listen, taking Spanish in Virginia is not for the thin skin, because it's like, "¿Cómo está usted?" It's rough. But it didn't lead to anything. I didn't get thrown out of school. In fact, I got decent grades in Spanish, probably better grades than I deserved.
That's funny. That's interesting. I would have expected, I guess, when I think of the 60s, I think of civil rights, I think of all this turmoil, the building up to those points of real contention between Black and white communities, and our civil rights activists, being on the brink of death and some being murdered, right? Like I think of that, that binary, all the tensions that surrounded that time. Obviously, I wasn't around then, so it's all just based on what I've read and what I've seen and what I've heard from friends like you. But I guess I would have expected you to say like, "Oh no, the white folks hated that," or "they used to stare at me," or so. I guess I'm really surprised, to be honest with you. That. Okay.
There was someone who did that. Once to take the story further, once the word got out at school that on the weekends you could hear me on this radio station. I think that, as I said, I'm already the nerd outcast. I'm the nerdy Jew who doesn't hang out with the cool kids, most of whom are Southern Baptists and come from wealthy families. And wasn't disliked. I just, was just kind of a loner. I had a couple of friends who also happened to be Jew. Well, one wasn't Jewish, but he was also a transplant. his family too had moved from up north, and he was a black music fan. In fact, he played sax in a band. So we shared that, even though he was otherwise very white, with a racist father who didn't like the music and, so on. But there was a time, and I think this kind of leads to what you're saying. There was a time I went to, it was in the cafeteria at lunch in high school. I guess the junior year. And a guy comes up to me, a guy who's in one of my classes, but not a friend, just a guy, an acquaintance. He comes up to me and says, "Man, is it true? Is it true? Are you crazy? Is it true?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. I heard you were seen dating a black girl. Dude, don't you realize you're not supposed to be seen? All of us want to do that. But I mean, he came with this whole cracker approach, like all of us want to do that. But you're not supposed to be seen. You don't date him, dude. You could really get hurt.
I did not expect you to say that.
And it was just just a get the fuck out of here moment. Right. It's like, I don't hear this shit.
Interesting.
And quite honestly, by then I was dating a sister who was a freshman in college. So I'm already feeling myself because I'm a junior in high school. And I wanted to tell him all that, but he wasn't worth it. It was just like, get out of my face. I don't want to hear that shit. And by then it was like, I went to class, I left class and got in my car and went where I'm going. Because you couldn't, I had white friends and would occasionally hang out with white boys and would go to bowling or doing the things guys do. It wasn't like my world was 100% black.
Yeah. But
you couldn't bring your friends as you normally would. Say, hey, I got these friends from over here. I got these friends from over here. Y'all should know each other. Let's all hang out and, go play softball or go bowling or go to a movie, whatever the fuck. And you couldn't do that. Because wasn't either side hearing it,
That's interesting.
So it was a weird situation to be in, but it wasn't something that I gave a whole lot of thought to because I just got in my car and went where I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
At any given moment. And it might be my Jewish friends and we go bowling, or it might be the brothers downtown at the radio station, or it might be this girl I'm dating. Right. And obviously, she and I got to be careful where we're going. We ain't going too far in public because neither side of the tracks is happy with that. And we don't want to hear it. So, it's a lot of watching TV.
Right. Now, once you started working with James Brown and later Prince, what was the role of like racial dynamics then? Did you feel like maybe it sort of allowed you to gain favor more quickly, right? Like with your white privilege, or did you have to work harder to gain the trust of somebody like James Brown or Prince, both who, from your books, from your stories, I've grown to learn that had very particular personalities. So what kind of role do you think your race played?
Much different answers. It's a different answer to each of those, which had to do with my age at the time I went to work for him, and it had to do with the times, the eras that we're talking about. The quick answer is the James Brown thing. I was already in there before I went to work for him because I had known him for I think I interviewed him for my radio show the first time in 1965. I didn't go to work for him until near the end of 69. And I had seen him probably at least a dozen times in between at various shows. And I used to follow his show around. I mean, it would be like when I was living in Richmond, if he was playing in Norfolk, Virginia, I would go. If he was playing in Washington, D.C., I would go. Baltimore, I would go. I would just follow his bus when I could get away from school and hang out backstage. So I already knew his guys. I knew, half the guys in the band. I knew his manager, who passed away in 1968, after which James managed himself. But when I first met him, he had a manager, older Jewish fellow named Ben Bart, who had been his manager from almost the beginning. I knew him. So I was kind of, already accepted in a sense.
Okay. Because you were just a genuine fan.
Yeah, but because of the radio station, I would interview him, and it gave me kind of a professional facade that was serious enough for them to say, okay, he's more than a fan.
Got it. You were credentialized by the radio station.
Exactly. So, and the way the call I got was because he needed a local promoter for a concert in Pittsburgh. Somebody to handle the promotion, and he trusted me enough to ask me to do it, and the show sold out, and he offered me a gig. So, so I was in there. Now with Prince, I didn't know a soul in the camp, didn't know him, knew his music, of course, but there was only one connection, is he had the same production manager on his tour at that time as Kiss did. And I was on a Kiss tour that was winding up. We had like 2 shows left. And this production manager, a fellow by the name of Tom Marzullo, came to me in catering. He said, "What are you doing next week when the tour ends?" I said, "Well, probably going home, wait for the phone to ring." He said, "You got any interest in Prince?" And I'm already a huge Prince fan. So it's like, what? He said, "Yeah, it was the tour incident was the 1999 tour."
Ooh-wee.
In support of that album. This was not to confuse people, this was in 1983. It was the 1999 tour. At any rate, he had apparently the tour had been out for months, and he'd been through 2 or 3 tour managers already and was looking for another. So Marzullo asked me, and I had already heard word through the grapevine that he was difficult to work for, but at 5 years of James Brown, I figured I could, he can't be that hard. It's like I got a master's degree in difficult artists, okay? So I was like, yeah, it beats going home and not getting paid. Yeah, let's hook it up. So I did an interview with his managers, and apparently they showed him some resumes, and he just said, "Get the James Brown guy." So point was, I got the Prince gig because I had James Brown on my resume. And getting into the Prince gig, of course, with a multiracial band, white management, even though he had an appeal to Black audiences, this was not a Black tour in the sense that it would have been if it had been P-Funk or,
Yeah.
He already had a mixed audience that actually grew. The proportion of whites in his audience grew as the tour went on, because Little Red Corvette came out and became a huge pop hit. So all of a sudden, we're seeing more and more white people in the audiences as the tour went on. Then, of course, the next year was Purple Rain. So there was a whole biracial thing to this that was entirely unique. And I mean, it just come off a Kiss tour. So, I wasn't wearing my black hat on that.
Right.
was,
Right.
that was a tour where you did not see one black face in the audience, backstage, nowhere.
How did you stumble upon the Kiss tour?
You're not going to believe this, through a want ad in Variety newspaper.
What? I don't think you ever told me that story.
It's a true story. It's nobody believes it. I was in New York and looking for work, managing a couple local bands that weren't making any money, and neither was I. And I decided to try to get back on the road. And I'm reading Variety, and there's literally a want ad that said tour manager want, didn't say who the artist was. Tour manager wanted for interviews, call this number.
Wow.
And usually I would have ignored that. It's just, that sounds hokey. But I call it up. It's an employment agency.
What?
Yes.
For Kiss?
So I go to this employment agency and take the meeting. They still don't tell me who the artist is. And they said, well, the artist managers will call you because we'll recommend you because of your history and your experience level. So we're going to recommend you, but we're also recommending a couple of other applicants to the management company. And if they're interested, they'll call you. So I figured that was the end of it. Just whatever. So within a week, the phone rang. And finally they say it's for Kiss. I almost dropped the phone. I'm like, get out of here. Well, it turns out they had just changed managers, and their new managers were people who also owned an advertising agency. They weren't really music biz people. So all they knew was to put a want ad.
Oh my God.
Because they weren't hooked up like that.
That's so funny.
And, go figure.
But
the point is, 3 months on the road with Kiss led to 10 years of Prince.
Wow.
So I was supposed to make that call.
Wow. What was it like transitioning from the soul funk world, black world of James Brown to the very, very white world of Kiss? Were you miserable? Were you just like, hey, music is music? Or what was that like?
I was only miserable if I had to stay and listen to the gigs.
Okay.
I actually finessed my way out of that.
Okay.
which is another story. It wasn't like culture shock because, in between James Brown, which was, definitely, you're working for a black man, for a black company who does business in the black world, okay? So that's a predominantly black situation. But in the interim, I had worked with other artists who had more mainstream appeal, and the business had changed throughout the 70s. I left James Brown in 74, and the business was in the midst of really changing. It was opening up. It was the beginning of the corporatization of it. And white promoters were buying into black music and making offers that black artists had never gotten before. So the whole economy, the industry was changing. And so it was kind of a gradual thing to the point where that world that I had first entered in 1969 pretty quickly ceased to exist to a great degree, because all of a sudden these artists could make more money and play mainstream venues. So a lot of those clubs that they used to play in the hood were no more, or just had local bands or discos, and so the whole industry had kind of changed, and I didn't have any choice but to just follow wherever it went. So there wasn't really a culture shock. It was just, you just deal with whoever, it's like you play the hand you dealt. Whatever artist you sign up to work with is going to be a new combination of people: white, black, smart, dumb, whatever.
Yeah. Hmm. Now, your career at this point is several years, right before Prince. So you've been in it for several years. How did your family's support, was that always consistent? Being the first in the family to pursue this world? Did it waver at any point?
It wavered at one point because there was a period of about a year and a half where my son was born, and I decided to come off the road.
Mm.
He was born premature, so he was in an incubator for like a month and a half before he even came home.
Mm.
So I decided that I needed and wanted to be at home.
Yeah.
And that meant finding some kind of a gig. And I actually worked for a couple of different jobs. I worked for Prudential Life Insurance.
Wow. That's a shift.
Had a desk job with life insurance for about a year and a half, maybe less. And at the same time, I started managing nightclub bands. I just couldn't leave that alone.
Yeah.
So I was, and the fact that my brother was leading one of the most popular bands in town kind of helped, because he was like, "Yo, dude, help manage us." So I was like, "Oh, okay, now I got an excuse to be in the club at night."
Right.
So of course it reached the point where it was like, okay, insurance or this, this one out real quick. So now I'm back to managing bands, but I'm trying, it's still not lucrative enough. And I can't see where it's leading anywhere. I mean, unless one of the bands really struck pay dirt, it wasn't going to lead anywhere. It was just be big fish in a little pond, managing local bar bands. That was going to get old real quick.
Yeah.
So, once my son pulled through and was good and doing all the things that baby at his age should be doing, and then it was like, okay, I need to make a living. I need to get back out here. And there were those in the family who thought that was the wrong move, including Tristan's mother, which I understood from a certain standpoint, but somebody could pay the bills. And that insurance job wasn't going to do it, at least not to the level that I wanted it done. And neither was these bar bands. So it's like you sit there and you say, okay, what is my employable, marketable skill set?
Right.
That's the only one.
That was the viable option.
And something that you would know, freelancing is always a risky situation, because I don't care how good you are at what you do, there's times where the phone just doesn't ring because it's just not your time.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't immune to that happening. I mean, everybody loves to talk about the flashy names on my resume. Great, but you ain't talking about that year nobody called,
right.
And there were those times.
Right.
And, for the tour managing is great when you're working. Because the pay is pretty decent. You can make a healthy middle-class living, well into middle class, if you're, know what you're doing and you got your game. But you got to work. That's only good as long as you're on the clock. And when that tour ends, you better have another one lined up. Or it's like, okay, So you're always hesitant. People would say when I'd come home off a tour, oh, you and Gwen can go off on a cruise. You can go to this and do that and do that. And I'm like, no, we got to save the money we made in case nobody calls.
Right.
It's a trick bag. It's a trick bag because you don't take the opportunity to do things that you would like to do in your personal life because you're afraid the phone won't ring and your bank account is looking real good today, but what's it going to look like 6 months from now if the phone doesn't ring? So you're careful how you spend it, even if you don't really need to be careful, but you do. So it's, you know, it's not all fun. There's some trick bags along the way.
I hear that. Let's talk about Gwen. You're the first in the family to marry outside your race. Is that right?
Yes. I should add that my father, born and raised Jewish, of two Jewish parents, married a Swedish Lutheran from Minnesota.
Okay.
Which raised some eyebrows. Although once they got to know my mom, she was fully accepted and ended up, you know, totally embraced by everybody. But I know it raised some eyebrows. Okay. Now, can't really say that's marrying outside your race. It's marrying outside your culture.
Yeah.
You know, he grew up in a poor Jewish family in the Lower East Side. She grew up in Minnesota. Much different.
Right. So there was definitely a cultural shift and a big departure.
But those weren't things that I felt. However that affected their marriage was settled by the time I was born, because I never felt any kind of cultural yin and yang between them. They were just mom and pop, and they seemed like a team to me.
Yeah.
You know? Now, mom was not the typical Minnesota girl either. I mean, the reason they met is because she had after college, left Minnesota and went to New York and was living on Washington Square. So she was kind of hip, wow. You know.
That's cool. Now marrying
she wasn't some farm girl. Let's put it that way.
Right. But you married a Black woman.
Exactly.
What was that like? Did you have to sit everybody down? Was it any kind of awkwardness or?
My parents knew Gwen long before we got married. By the time I met Gwen in 1981, and by that time, folks knew I dated all kinds of women. So there was, you know, it wasn't like the kind of guess who I'm bringing home to dinner thing. And I knew Gwen and my folks were going to get along because of who they were as people. This is now, you know, it's no longer the 1960s in Virginia. This is now the 80s. And I'm living in Brooklyn Heights and she's living in Brooklyn Heights. And we got mutual friends that hook us up and we decided they did a good thing, you know, and stayed hooked up.
Nice.
And I kind of made a point once we became a serious couple, you know, like any couple, it was like, well, you need to meet my family and I need to meet yours. So actually, in terms of our families, it was very normalized. There were nobody going, oh my God, how could you do this? There was none of that on either side. Which I'm proud of because it's not that common, I guess, when I talk to other mixed race couples that haven't had it quite as easy. But I also think it had something to do with where we were at the phase of our lives when we met. If it had been in the 60s, I'm sure it would have been different. There would have been all kinds of warnings about, hey, I don't care how cool she is. Do you know what you're doing? It's dangerous. Right. It's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. We didn't get that. And Gwen became the daughter my mother never had. And my dad adored her, and, too damn much, drove me crazy. I couldn't compete. But by that token, I came from a very small family. I had just one brother, who I'm still extremely close to. I mean, we're like, hang together all the time. He lives here too. We're inseparable. And on my mother's side, I have several first cousins. On my father's side, I have none. His brother and sister neither of them had kids.
Oh, wow.
So as I grew up, I didn't grow up with big families. When it was, holidays, it wasn't like I'm going to hang out with my cousins and we're going to do this and do that. It's like, no. And also the fact that my parents never lived, as we were growing up, we never lived in a city where there were relatives because of my father's career. So we didn't have access to family on any kind of regular basis. So it was always just me and my brother and my parents. Summertime, I would go to New York and hang out with my grandmother in Queens when I was young. But by the time I was a teenager, then, you're doing stuff at home and you're trying to hang with your friends and so on and chase girls and do all the stupid stuff you do as a kid. So we didn't have a family thing. But with Gwen, who came from a relatively large family, I've inherited all these wonderful nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles, and not to mention her father passed, unfortunately, and one of her sisters and her brother passed, but she still has one sister that's with us. And, so now I have the big family that I didn't have growing up, and I love it. It's just so cool because it's like I wasn't used to holidays with a lot of people, and now I have that. It's terrific.
Yeah, that's how I feel about my husband's family.
Okay. I think Gwen and I are very blessed because we really don't have the horror stories that some mixed race couples might have. Yeah. Although obviously it's now become more fashionable than it was, back in the day. But we've almost count on one hand the time that we've seen people, that we've had anybody say or do anything rude to us. Maybe it's because we're older.
That's surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, Minneapolis is very open. I mean, the joke back in the day was, if you want to be in a mixed race relationship, move to Minnesota, because Minneapolis, and I don't know why, I cannot explain why, was ahead of the curve in that sense. I have no idea why. So when we moved here from Brooklyn in 1983, we were astounded at how many mixed race couples that we would just run into. And because even back in the city in the early 80s, you would occasionally get some stares on the subway, or there'd be a brother looking at you like being really happy you with her, or the other way around, But we came here and never felt it.
Wow.
It was crazy.
I have like one or two last questions, if that's okay. I know we've gone much longer than anticipated. You spoke about your conversation with your nephew-in-law, I suppose. And especially in the last, I'd say 10 years, maybe a little less, conversations around race dynamics, privilege, white supremacy, all of that have been, like you said, sort of the catchphrases, the buzzwords, and also in a more substantive way, the catalyst for lots of change, whether at a policy level, cultural level, in corporate America, across different places. Like, people are really contending with race and racism and anti-Blackness in a way that I think hasn't happened in a while. I think there's pros and cons, but my question for you is, now that there is so much new information available and these concepts like white privilege that weren't necessarily the way you were thinking about it in the 60s when you were experiencing it, but you didn't have that language. Now that you know all of these new things, now that you're in these conversations of the sort of the modern world, do you reflect differently on your career? Are there points in your career that maybe you weren't using your whiteness in a way that you could have? Are there things that you regret maybe not saying or saying, doing or not doing?
No, I don't have any regrets. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, we've all done things we wish we hadn't done. But overall, I have been so freaking lucky, because here's the deal. When I got into this, it was because I loved the music and the people, and I was fascinated by the people who made it. I wasn't into it because I was fascinated with the civil rights movement or thinking I'm going to become part of some shit. I ended up part of it to a degree with James Brown because he and his company were part of it. I learned a lot that I'm eternally grateful I learned. But the reason I was there is because I loved the music and how they made it. And basically, my career has been a blessing in the sense that I've gotten paid for a hobby. Cecy, with one exception, every artist I've worked with is somebody whose music I liked, or in some cases loved. The Prince thing, I wasn't a Prince fan. A girlfriend took me to a show against my will. This was his controversy tour. And I was like, yeah, Prince, he's just another falsetto guy, just nothing. And of course, the show blew me away, just like, holy shit. And not just him, but the lighting, the staging, because all of it was like so musical. It was artistic. It was creative. It just wasn't a bunch of gimmicks. And I remember saying to this young lady, I said, boy, I would like to roll with them. They've got this shit. Right. And a year and a half later, this guy says in catering, you're interested in Prince? And I called Gwen and said, yo, guess what? I'm not coming home. Oh, going to work for Prince. Really? and D'Angelo, I damn near paid to work for him, to sit there and listen to that band play his music night after night after night after night. Get out of here.
Yeah.
It was like, I get paid for this?
Yeah.
Because that was my fascination from the beginning. And having seen some of the YouTube videos of what Pino and Sharkey and Chris Dave did at the Blue Note last week in New York, it's still my fascination. It's the whole reason I'm in here. And everything else was a bonus. Everything else just kind of came along, and I took it as it came and said, okay, I got to deal with this. Okay, now I got to deal with this. Now I got to deal with this. And the education it provided, where the music took me, was things I never dreamt. From the travel to the experiences to the animosities to the understanding of the cultures. All of that was a tributary from this love of the music. And Dates back to the fact that my parents put no restrictions. That's your original question. It's like, whether they liked it or not, they expressed support. In other words,
Yeah.
I mean, I like what you're going to do, but not going to go do it well. And it's been a great trip. And still is. It's like, the funny thing is the whole thing started with a love of James Brown's music. And what am I doing now? I call myself retired, and I'm sitting home, but I'm having Zoom meetings all the time, and I'm dealing with the production of a story about James Brown for television. And it's like, get out of here.
It's incredible.
I just feel I owe a debt to God or somebody, and just, it's just very lucky, because everything, the only gig I ever chased was James Brown. All these others came along. Prince was like, get the James Brown guy. D'Angelo was get the Prince guy. Maxwell, get the Prince guy. And it just, Raphael Saadiq was get the D'Angelo guy. It's and
amazing.
It's just dumb luck.
Maybe. Or a design, a grand divine design.
Okay.
Sure. Well, I will say this: it's an honor to have been in a tiny little snippet of that life with you, because to work with you and to be alongside you is to see that passion and that love in real life, and I can confirm to listeners that passion is real, that exuberance that you express for this music and for this world is so genuine and so authentic, that it made it a real pleasure to work in an industry that can be really tough, right? It was a very short-lived chapter for me, but you are in large part what made it so awesome. So I am thankful that I got to be in your orbit.
Stop.
I know. I mean it.
I have a picture in my photo scrapbook of us standing in the Brooklyn Bowl before a sound check, and you're looking in one direction and I'm looking in the other. But it's like we both have the expressions of, okay, what do we got to do?
Oh, you got to send me
it's a cool picture. It's a cool picture. It says a lot.
Oh, cool. Take a picture with your phone and send it to me. I don't have many photos from that era.
I'll scan it.
Yeah, even better. Alan Leeds, thank you for being here on First in the Family.
Well, that's one of the first. Yeah, I'm the first in the family to do the show.
There you are. There you go. No, I appreciate you. Yeah, I liked it. We're going to keep it.
It is so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. Thanks for doing this, for supporting my little podcast.
Yeah. So once you edit this down to something sane,
I will.
This is what I'd like a copy of. This was different.
This was different. Yeah.
Gwen was like, "What's this podcast about?" And I said, "Well, it's about psychology. It's not about James Brown and the same old stuff. So what do we talk about? James Brown and the same old stuff, but in a very different light." So
yeah, that was my goal, because I mean, I know everybody loves to interview you, which is, I understand why, but yeah, I wanted to focus on you because I want folks who are listening who are navigating maybe a similar world. Maybe they're in the industry, maybe they're not, but to really be able to connect with folks who are just navigating new worlds, don't know what they're doing, using their gut, using dumb luck, like you kept saying, to just figure it out. That's really the goal of the show, is just to be like, yeah, we are all trying to figure it out and,
Right.
bumping around in the dark, but you get through. And when you trust your gut, you end up a lot of times with a dope story. Okay, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for all this time. I apologize for taking so much of it, but it was so nice to catch up and see your face.
Don't apologize. It was huge fun.
It was a lot of fun.
And we can't let it be so long.
Absolutely. I will keep bugging you. Don't worry.
Good.
Alan shared with us today all of the decisions from his career, the amazing career he had in his life, and the first that he took basically because of his passion. Some might have considered it crazy, strange, or not going to lead to anything lucrative, but he developed the most amazing stories and career and lifetime as a result of it. And he's still working on all of his passion projects. He calls it dumb luck. I call it following your heart and letting the universe and God guide you. Whatever it is, he's definitely demonstrated what a first in the family story is really all about. Resilience, passion, and trusting yourself. If something stayed with you today, spoke to you, or otherwise moved you, please share it with us on social media. If you have any questions, follow-up questions, or things you'd like us to expound upon, please do the same. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at First in the Fam. Be sure to follow us and tag us so that we can reach even more people who, like you, can relate to the complexities and the joys and the pains and the confusion of being the first. I want to thank our very special guest, Alan Leeds. Thank you so much for sharing your story today so vulnerably, so honestly. And I want to thank my producer, Gapi, the first producer in his family. Big shout out to him. And of course, I want to thank you, our listeners, for your generosity of spirit and your valuable listening today. My name is Cecy, and this has been First in the Family. Please tune in next week to see who's first. Bye.